Hello, everybody. This is Phil Kruger. I do a little podcast slash YouTube video called Phil's Bills, or that's my YouTube channel. So, for the very few people that actually watch this right now, I just wanted to let you guys know I've decided to try something new. I'm doing like a cross video podcast thing where I upload my podcast, but I also have video in case you guys just want to do that. And watch my video instead. So I figure effectively to have the best of both worlds. So that's what I'm doing right now. I also wanted to talk about Proposition 2. So I typically do, what I'm doing right now is a series on the California initiative systems and exactly what the arguments are, both for and against, what exactly they do. Because I feel like a lot of people don't really know what these initiatives do. Right? They just kind of say a lot of nice things, like, in this case, housing for the homeless. And, I mean, who would vote against housing for the homeless, right? So, I think it's really difficult to analyze the actual effect of these propositions, because I think if you went back in time, people would probably tell you, hey, you know, these propositions, they're bad. Or some of these propositions that we thought were good were actually bad because they restricted the legislature's ability to actually do anything. So this one kind of sort of deals with something like that, but it really deals with something that happened in 2004, which was the first year I could vote. So I remember this well, and it deals with Proposition 63. So Proposition 63 is often called the millionaire's tax because it's basically taxed anybody with an income over $1 million and said that a certain portion of your funds will go to a specific fund in the California budgetary system. That fund being like the Mental Health Services Fund, the MHSA. And that part of that fund will go through mental health illnesses all across the state of California. And it'll be dispersed to counties, and counties will be able to use those funds as they see fit. So for example, in San Joaquin County, there's a Prop 63 court for people with mental health. And essentially what that is if you get convicted, it's a term of probation that, if you complete it, might kind of fast-track an expungement process. Or it might even negate a conviction altogether. It kind of depends on how the DA deals with it. Right? That's how Prop 63 works in, for example, San Joaquin County. I haven't seen a Prop 63 court in Stanislaus County. I don't know how that really works. I've never heard the public defenders mention it. So every county uses those funds differently. The county can use funds for mental health treatment, mental health prevention, basically supportive services for family members dealing with family members of mental health. That was the whole point of the bill. Now, admittingly, I voted against the proposition. I'm not really a big fan of tax increases. And California basically leverages a lot on the income tax. So anytime you see an income tax increase in California, you should vote against it, because California's budgetary system relies heavily on income taxes, and that's really bad, because when, 5 years ago, the economy dipped and the economy took a nosedive, California's budget went to crap, right? So that's kind of an aside, but it's also somewhat important. That being said, nothing that I talk about today is going to get rid of Proposition 63. Right, so the millionaire's tax will still exist. So if you're a millionaire watching this, first off, please contribute. I'd appreciate it. I can give you my address. But if you're not going to do that, you're going to be fine. You're still going to be taxed. So I want to talk about what Prop 2 does specifically. Proposition 2 deals with something the legislature passed in 2016 called the No Place Like Home Act. And what the No Place Like Home Act does, essentially it takes part of that mental health funding, about $2 billion worth, and sells bonds, right, from that revenue stream for supportive services for homeless people. For mentally ill homeless people. Normally this would be a good thing, right? My last podcast talked about the need for housing, and the need for housing specifically for the mentally ill and for other just standard California citizens. Here's the problem. Many of my streams, many of my future recordings are going to talk about how legislation isn't so much red versus blue, right versus wrong, but one set of winners versus another set of losers. This is a perfect example of that. when this bill was created, essentially what it did was divert the mental health funding from supportive services, from prevention, from treatment and education towards housing, right? And when you do that, obviously you're going to have people who believe in prevention, treatment, education, support, general support, who are going to be like, well, wait, we need our money, right? We need money to do this. So they sued. A coalition of these people sued, and they're probably going to win their suit. The suit hasn't been decided yet. The reason they're going to win is because this gambit was tried back in 2016. And just so anybody knows, the people proponent this gambit were also, I call it a gambit, I mean that in a morally neutral sense, right? A scheme, a proposal. The people supporting this effectively mentally ill housing first approach were some of the people behind Prop 63, specifically Darrell Steinberg, who is the mayor of Sacramento. He was a very important power player in the California political scene for a very long time. Obviously, he's a Democrat. He was the head of he was the state Senate leader, right? But because of term limits, he had to leave, and now he's back in his hometown of Sacramento. He has a very personal connection to mental illness. His daughter has been dealing with mental illness and was diagnosed with mental illness. I believe it's like severe bipolar disease since like 14, right? So Darrell Steinberg, in all credit, this is a major issue for him, right? That's why he supported Prop 63. That's why he's kind of pushing the homeless, the Housing First Act. Sorry, I'm trying to come up with the right word for it. The Housing First Act. Here's the problem. The problem is, like I said, when you do that, you detract from the other things that resolve mental health issues. And when people passed Prop 63, they specifically went to a specific fund. And here's the deal about whenever you pass a tax via initiative vote, which is what Prop 63 was, you're bound by the terms of that tax, right? You're bound by the terms of, it's like a contract. When you propose to the citizenry a contract to make with them for purposes of, this is what we want you to tell other people to pay for, you have to honor that contract. And so in 2006, Darrell Steinberg and his associates tried to push a very similar concept. And at that time, I think it was Governor Schwarzenegger, his attorney general, and I have to look up to see who that was. I think it was Bill Lockyer, published a letter, an informal legal opinion, which executive offices are wont to do because it gives guidance to other offices as to what they can do. Basically saying that the homelessness, that resolving housing first, went against the terms of that contract that they made with the people of California, because when you do a bond for housing, you're committing an agency for 5 to 10 years. But the very specific terms of Prop 63 talk about a year-to-year assessment and a year-to-year needs and unmet need, right? And so when you kind of come from above and you create a state program, you sort of detract from the ability of the counties to resolve their needs, which means you're detracting from the counties and you're preventing them from honoring the terms of that contract that you and essentially millions of California voters signed back in 2004. So that's basically, the governor said, the attorney general said, no dice, right? You guys can't do this. Relying on that opinion, 10 years later, other people have said, yeah, look, we think he's right. And honestly, I've read the opinion. I think they've probably got a good point here. The legislature did not really... I mean, housing was support services were part of it, but that was very clearly a component of it, not kind of the main driving force. And don't get me wrong, I understand exactly why this has become an issue 10 years later. Homelessness is on the rise amongst all populations, mentally ill, mentally, non-ill. So I get the need, right? The need is there. The problem is the need when it comes to mental health is there for everything else. So that's the backdrop. Basically, in 2006, the Attorney General said, you can't do No Place Like Home. In 2016, they decided to ignore that advice and do it anyway. And immediately they were sued by people who were like, wait, you can't do that. Those people are likely to win. The reason Prop 2 exists is if, essentially, it exists to revise and amend the contract. What Proposition 2 does, it says, look, we are asking you, the people of California, to specifically revise your expectations for our contract with you to tax you. Specifically asking you to revise this so that you may allow us to do a housing first approach. So if it gets passed, if Proposition 2 passes, the lawsuit is moot, right? Because the people of California have said, yes, look, we are okay with you doing this approach and attacking mental illness this way. But if Proposition 2 doesn't pass, and this is the weird part about it, we don't know what will happen, right? Because while I think the lawsuit will succeed, meaning that the No Place Like Home funds won't ever be dispersed, it may fail. And if it fails, then Proposition 2 is meaningless, right? Essentially, the legislature can do as it pleases in this regard, because the courts will have said that what the legislature is doing is within the contractual promises made by it when it proposed Proposition 63. So there may be a negligible effect to Prop 63 at all. I mean, it can be completely negligible, or sorry, to Prop 2 at all. It could be a completely meaningless bill. But it's smart for the proponents to want to do it this way, because it cuts everything off at the pass, and you can really focus on kind of implementing the next step. And just so that we all know, we're not talking about chump change here. So when this bill was passed in 2016, the legislature, the California legislature, started dispersing grants out to counties up to the tune of $2 billion worth. $2 billion, right, amongst all California's 56 counties. So divide $2 billion by 56, we're still talking about a significant chunk of change, especially if you're talking in rural counties. But the counties aren't doing anything with it. And I'm assuming I figure out this YouTube thing right. I'm going to post a link of a very good LA Times article that talks about kind of the background and really the fact that this $2 billion is in limbo, because if it's illegal to have this money, it's illegal to disperse the money. And therefore, if you disperse the money and it's illegal to have, then everything gets rewound. And so what they're essentially trying to do is they're trying to stop a problem before it starts. That's really the theme of Prop 2, is everyone's trying to stop this legal issue from kind of rewiring their plans. So this is not so much a red versus blue issue. I've talked about bonds a little bit. Last video I did talked about bond indebtedness. I kind of went at great length about it. That's not really going to apply here, and the reason it doesn't apply here is because the propositions that Proposition 2 is proposing to use are called revenue bonds, and those are different from general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds are the legislature sells bonds, bond people pay the bonds, and those funds can go to anywhere. Revenue bonds take money from a specific revenue stream within the state. They sell the bond with the promise that the money will come from that revenue stream within the state, right? So in other words, what this really affects is future mental health services, right? So this $2 billion bond, even when you compound it with 30 years of interest, we're talking billions and billions of dollars down the line that will necessarily be focused on housing first, and also necessarily be focused away from prevention, away from treatment, away from family support, and any other service like that. So you have winners and losers. The winners are people who want people in houses as quick as possible, and who think that that's kind of the best way not only to deal with drug-based homelessness, but also mental health-based homelessness. And the losers are people who kind of wanted to attack the mental health issue first, and kind of conglomerate it with housing. So the other background for all of this, and the other twist in this kind of semi-soap opera story, is in 2017, the legislature passed a bill that said that Prop 63 funding could go to counties on an as-needed basis. And so I'll get to that in a minute, but basically, it's not going to be as much money as the $2 billion, right? Because if you're talking about an as-needed basis, you still got to go through the county process with developers. You still got to go through all that stuff, and you still got to get the county to basically take a housing first approach. Basically, right now, Prop 63 allows counties to fund housing, but it does not guarantee $2 billion worth of it. That's where the rub lies, right? It doesn't guarantee as much money. It says the counties may use it. So it's an issue of a guarantee versus an issue of what's necessary. And so there are arguments on both sides. The argument for it, and you can probably get this from what I'm mentioning, is, look, this is going to develop new homes, which is almost inevitably true, right? It is true, as the opponents say, that you're not going to overcome CEQA laws, California Environmental Quality Act laws, other local laws that restrict development and kind of slow development down. That's all true, right? But inevitably, if you disperse money for new homes are going to be built, right? I think that's inevitable. I think the argue that no new homes will be built is silly. I used to be a debater, and debaters have a term called 1% chance of solvency. In other words, if you get a 1% chance of something happening, you should vote for the plan. And while I don't necessarily advocate that last half of it, we have what we would call a 1% chance of solvency here. Like, we are going to build new homes with this if this thing gets passed. I don't have any doubt of that whatsoever. How many is up to question, of course, and there's no way of knowing that now. There's no way of knowing that even if we voted down Prop 2 and Prop 2 passed, and the lawsuit that made Prop 2 necessary ends up getting decided in the legislature's favor. There's no way of knowing how many new homes would be passed. So that part is speculative. But that there will be new homes and that those new homes will go to mentally ill people, I think absolutely true. No doubt in my mind that's true. So I think the proponents are right there. I mean, that's their main argument. The second argument is that this strengthens partnerships. I think that's nonsense, right? When you have the state government saying that you must spend this money on this type of thing, and you have counties that would rather spend it somewhere else, specifically Contra Costa County, which Contra Costa County is kind of bankrolling the No on 2 issue. You can't tell me that partnerships will be strengthened, right? Some might, because some counties might want a housing first approach, but some counties might be pissed because they don't want a housing first approach, right? So to argue that this strengthens local control, that's a nonsense argument, right? Local control is going to be strengthened by doing something that gives localities more of an ability to figure out if the money should go to housing or to treatment or to whatever, and that's effectively the status quo right now, especially post-2017 when they passed and amended Prop 63 to allow counties to deal with development on an as-needed basis. So the idea that this strengthens partnerships is nonsense. It's the third thing is that this is not a tax. Yes, it's not a tax. It's obvious. Of course it's not a tax. But, okay, the problem with the main objection people have to taxes in like the citizenry, like myself, would have to taxes, is that when the government takes money from me, I can't spend it on something that would help the people the government wants to help. For example, government takes away a certain percentage of my income. I spend less, right? Maybe I give less to, friends or something, right? My desire to help my friends and to give less to the economy, which, of course, if I give money to businesses, they pay their employees, they can sustain wage increases that are mandated under California law, my ability to do that is diminished, right? And instead it goes to the government, where it may go to ill-gotten purposes or great purposes. But what I know is when the government takes money from me, I'm not using it on the purposes that I think are good, right? And so fundamentally there's an objection to the tax system. It works the same way here. The government is taking money it has promised to counties for mental health services, right? It is not necessarily taking away that money, but it is adding a massive restriction to that money, and therefore freezing that money, and saying, counties, you can't do what you feel is needed because we think this is needed, which is why this doesn't, again, strengthen partnerships. But it does, in my opinion, create a situation where the counties essentially are crowded out from doing what they think is best, right? So as you're starting to see, this is less an argument about money and more an argument about control, local versus state. So the arguments against, the main argument is that this is pro-developer. That's also true. I also don't give a lot of credence to that argument. Let's be straight. Let's be honest, folks. Starters, one, we need new homes. that statement alone is pro-developer, because developers are the ones that build homes, right? So that argument is kind of absurd. But secondly, the status quo, which it's interesting because the proponents then reference that later on, is potentially pro-developer as well. At the point where you're saying that the status quo, which is a fancy Latin phrase of saying this is the way things are, the status quo right now, post-2017, allows for counties to give money to build homes anyway, and that would inevitably benefit developers. So when they say this benefits developers, that's crap. The status quo benefits developers, and frankly, who cares? Because the solution to California is inevitably going to benefit people who make homes and build homes. So, that this is costly. Yes, sort of. Right? It is costly in the same way that it detracts the ability for counties to control where their mental health funds should go. Right? Because it basically says you have to create a big earmark for housing. So it's costly in the sense that it prevents people who have different priorities from doing those priorities. It's not like an extra amount of funds. It doesn't like lessen the total pot of funds. It just lessens the control over those funds. So in a way, yes, that's correct. And the last argument they had was essentially that this is unnecessary. Sometimes I can't read my own writing. Their argument is that basically this whole thing is absolutely unnecessary because the status quo is dealing with this anyway. That depends, right? If the status quo, if every county determined that they wanted to do housing first, and that basically equated to all the counties, basically you added their expenses that they built to housing, and that equated to $2 billion, then they'd be right? But that only exists if that situation occurs. If you have some counties that went less with housing and more with treatment, then obviously there would be a need for this bill if you believed in a housing first approach for mental health illness. So it is necessary if you believe in a housing first approach. So that argument is not true, and that argument only becomes true if all the counties agreed with housing first anyway, thus obviating the need for a No Place Like Home to begin with, right? So in the end, I mean, my recommendation, I think both sides have legitimate arguments, and it's really hard for me to get into the nitty-gritty and say what county should do first, because every county is different, right? San Joaquin, as it currently stands, the county I reside in, currently has enough housing for the homeless people that want it right now, right? It does not have enough housing for all homeless people. But note, I'm talking about homeless people. I'm not talking about mentally ill people. And while, yes, there's obviously a correlation between the mentally ill and the homeless, right? There are plenty of mentally ill homeless people. I'm not denying that. What I'm saying is San Joaquin County could use it for that. But I also know that Stockton is riddled with crime, and that a lot of Stockton's crime is contributed by people with persistent, severe, and non-treated mental health illness. So putting that money into a court program that collaborates with these people to clean these people's records and to allow them to kind of become a better citizen, I think is also a smart plan, right? I don't know what county should do with that money. Because I don't know, I'm not going to propose a plan or support a plan that purports to create a housing first approach, right? Because I don't know the answer. And if I don't know the answer, then my situation here is to devolve and to give the counties local control. So in that sense, I'd be a no on two, right? Because at the end of the day, who really knows how to help the mentally ill? Probably mental health professionals. And I imagine that the counties contract with mental health professionals on a county basis to determine what is needed for those individuals, right? And so if the state's right and it turns out that housing is needed, then like I just said, you're going to get housing anyway, right? You're going to get No Place Like Home anyway. The goals of the legislation that they passed in 2016 will be met, but it will be met on a county approach. But if the state is wrong, then thank goodness we don't have No Place Like Home, because then we can have the counties determine how to best handle their specific mental health issues that they specifically face. What this is really is far less about money and far more about the state telling counties what it thinks they should do. And that, I think, is somewhat objectionable. Because I don't know if the state knows any better of the counties what to do. I think the counties know best. In my experience, just kind of talking with some local government officials, counties are where the rubber hits the road, right? More than states, more than the feds. So what affects people's lives more often than not is county governance. So in that sense, we might want to give counties more flexibility on this thing and vote no on 2. Alright guys, I will come up with something on Prop 3 relatively soon. Anyway, thank you for listening to this, and have a nice day.